Hey everyone, I'm Jake and this is my first official tutorial for anything at all, so I'm pretty excited and ready to begin. Today I'm going to show you what I've been calling double stuffed tracking, which is not tracking text to a potato, but rather I'm going to give you a breakdown on how I accomplished my biography video, which you can see right now.
I love how an idea creates a ton of questions and can turn into a great piece of work.
So to create this kind of effect, I used After Effects along with Mocha AE, which is a 2D planar tracking program bundled with After Effects CS4, and PF Track, which is a 3D tracking program. If you can't afford PF Track, then there are definitely other cheaper 3D tracking programs out there, like Synthise, for example. So if you know the basics to Mocha AE and PF Track, then you're all good, because that's pretty much all that's involved in this. There may be other ways to create the same effects, maybe even in just one step, but this works for me, and it gives me the effect I want. So once I worked out how it all comes together, all the tracking, etc., then it's pretty straightforward, and it gives you something that's pretty dynamic. So my original inspiration for this piece was the HP ads, which I'm sure you've all seen. I didn't want to copy their technique directly, but I wanted to do something similar and bring it to a different level and create something a bit more complex and unique. So in the HP ads, they have a static camera and they have someone just standing in front of the camera waving their hands around, and their hands kind of motivate the graphics to do what they want, and it tells their story. So I decided to take it to the next level where I wanted to move the camera. So this meant I had to have something to track. I eventually decided on holding boards that the graphics would show up on, giving me the tracking information that I needed, and still allowed me to interact in a 3D space. After taking the time to figure out how this all worked and did a quick test, I was ready to write the script to my bio video and rehearse the actions that coincided. So I have a little clip here of my bio video, just a little segment of it, and I'm going to import this into Mocha AE to start. So all the settings here should be fine. And I have my clip in Mocha. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw an X-spline around my board. So I'm just going to get all these track markers in here. And I'm going to turn on perspective because it moves around, so there's perspective on the board. Then I'm going to hit track, and it's going to track the whole board. And you can see it kind of going slowly. So you can see that I have a pretty decent track on my footage here. So now I'm going to turn on my surface layer. So my surface layer is basically what I'm going to be exporting into After Effects. So this represents corner pin data. So each corners of this square or rectangle here is one of my points on my corner pin effect in After Effects. So I'm going to drag these to the corner of my board. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go outside the corner of the board, just so I have a little bit more room to work with once I comp it into After Effects. And you'll see why, once I bring it into After Effects, why it's useful. Now I can skim through the timeline now, and it looks pretty good. The surface seems to track really well. So now I'm going to export this as corner pin data. So I can go up to the File menu and say File Save Tracking Data. And it's going to give you this box here. And you make sure that it's on After Effects corner pin data, and you hit Save. You could just copy this right into your clipboard, but I recommend making a text file so you can save it with your project. So I'm going to hit Save, and I'm going to name this one Tracking Small. I actually need two versions of the tracking, so I'm going to go back in after I'm done saving this and export something else. So now that I'm done my 2D tracking small, I'm going to go back into Mocha AE and I'm going to change my surface. And I'll show you why I need this in a second in After Effects. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move my surface layer corners to be much bigger than my board. So I'll just move each point here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to save it out as tracking data. And I'm going to call this one tracking large. Now I'm ready to go into After Effects with my footage here. So I'll bring it into After Effects and I'll create a new composition. And I'm going to start off by creating two different solids. And they have to be the exact same size as my composition. It's very important that they are because corner pin data does not come in properly if you don't paste it on something that has the same size as your original footage. So I'm going to call one large and I'm going to call one small. So then I'm going to actually pre-comp each one of these. And I'm going to name them large matte and small matte. So I'm going to turn off the large matte for now, and I'll leave the small one on, and I'll work with the small tracking data first. So I'm going to go out of After Effects and open up this tracking small text file that we created, and I'm going to select all the text, Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC, and I'm going to copy it. So now I'm going to go back into After Effects, and I'm going to select the small layer, and I'm going to make sure my time indicator is at the very first of the composition, and I'm going to hit paste. So now you see that the corner pin data has pasted on the small comp and is tracking smoothly with the matte. So now I can do the same with the large one. So I'm going to open up the large tracking data, copy it, and paste it right on my large pre-comp. So now you see that the large one moves around with the matte as well. So I'll turn off the large one, and I'm going to put the small one behind my footage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to key the footage, and you'll see the pre-comp come up behind it. Now this is the reason why I made it a little bit bigger than the board, was because I didn't want to make it perfect just in case you could see a fine line at the edge of the board. I just wanted to make sure that the board always had that 2D plane under it, and you can never see the edge of that. So once you do this, you'll notice you have all these tracking marks, which you'll have to roto out basically later. It's pretty much garbage matting, so it can go pretty fast. So now, because that small board is a pre-comp, we can go inside the pre-comp and change anything we want, add animation, or add pictures of Copan the hamster. And when we go outside into the footage comp again, we can see that it follows along. So that's your basic planar tracking and getting it into After Effects. So you're kind of stuck with things being on the board and they can't move out into 3D space because they're stuck inside the corner pin data. So next I'm going to show you how to get things to pop off your board and still maintaining the perspective of the camera shot and how the board is moving. So that's where my large tracking comes in. I'm going to turn off my small track here, and I'm going to turn off my footage as well. And I'm just going to leave on the large track. So this is what I'll use for the next pass of 3D tracking. I could use the small pre-comp, but I want as much information as possible to go into the 3D tracking program. So I made a large one, so it gives a lot of information. So it's a solid right now, and tracking requires points of reference. So I'm going to add a texture in this pre-comp. And I actually used a detailed quilt for when I actually created this project, just because it had a lot of textures and patterns that the computer could grab onto and track. So now we have this quilt just moving around on a black background. And I'm going to export this as a QuickTime movie with an animation codec so it's ready for PFTrack. So once that's done, I have my QuickTime file, and the goal with PFTrack is to basically trick the computer and tell it that this quilt is a floor, which is not moving at all, even though it is in the shot. And we're going to trick it to tell it that a camera is moving around this quilt to give the movement of the quilt. So static quilt, moving camera, even though at the moment the camera was moving and the quilt was moving as well. So I'm just going to take my quilt QuickTime here and I'm going to import it into PFTrack. So I'm going to click Track and Solve. And I pretty much let it do its thing. And you can see that it's tracking as many points as possible. And this will eventually interpret that into a camera solve. So now it has all my points of reference, and we can see that it solved it pretty good. First, I'll make sure that the center of my 3D space is right on my board. So I'm just going to right click on one of the track points that are around the center. I'm going to say set as origin. So this moves the grid to make sure that 0, 0, 0 and X, Y, and Z position are at the very center, laying right on my board. Now I'm going to make sure that all my scene geometry is pretty accurate for when I export into After Effects, so it all translates properly. So I'll just switch into 3D view here, and I can see the X, Y, and Z planes that the tracking information falls on. And I can just rotate here a little bit to make sure that it's vertical, make sure that it lines up with my X. And lines up with my Y. So once all the tracking points are lined up pretty well, I can start tagging ones for export. And basically I just select a few that either on the board or around it so I can get points of reference in After Effects. You could export every single one of these points, but it would give you probably about 100 layers in After Effects, and it's a little excessive to work with. So I just need a few of them to show me where in 3D space the points lie. Now I'm ready for export, so I'm going to right click on Export Camera, and I'm going to make sure that it's chosen for After Effects and tag points only. And I'm ready to hit OK. So I can drag this .ma file right into After Effects, and it's going to create a new composition for me with all the data. So I open this up and I see that there's a camera and it has all my null points. And if I scroll through it, I can see that everything's moving around. So I'm going to copy all these layers and I'm going to paste it right into my footage comp. So now you can see that my null objects line up with my footage. Everything seems to track nicely. So from here I can just add a simple text layer and I can turn it into a 3D layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of my null objects, probably from the center, and I'm going to just twirl down its position value, and I'm going to copy that position value. And I'm going to paste it onto my 3D text and scale it to make sure it looks right. So I'll just scroll through that, and it moves around with my footage. Now, since the null is right on the board, the text just sits on the board, so then you can move it into 3D space where you want to. So you can adjust its position value. It's easier to see when I duplicate a few versions of the text and move them in multiple places in 3D, and now you can really see the perspective. So everything almost looks like it's towering out of the board, so you can get a good perspective when the board moves around. So you basically now have two worlds going on. You have your 2D world, which is inside your board, which things can animate on, and you have your 3D world in front of the board, where you can make your graphics move around and interact with your hands. So you can also export the 3D tracking data into a 3D program, and you can get a 3D artist to render out something based on the tracking information, like this watch here I did for another project. So it interacts the same way and you get nice 3D perspective on it instead of using just 2D layers in 3D space within After Effects. So that's it, double stuff tracking. I hope you enjoyed my first tutorial, and you can check out some of my other stuff on owensproductions.com.